Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. Welcome to The Pipeline That Matters, How the Absence of Literacy Impacts Preschool Students. My name is Monica Washington. I am going to be your chat facilitator today, so I'll mostly be out of the way, but I wanted to give you just a few logistical things about the chat feature and about this breakout session. Thank you to those of you who are introducing yourselves in the chat. Absolutely do that. We will, during this session, you'll have the actual link to the presentation, and that presentation has links in there, it has resources in there. I'm super excited about this session myself, so feel free to follow along and to go into those links. You will also have the Twitter handles of our amazing presenters today. You have Dr. Char-Shenda Covington, Dr. Johni Cruse Craig, Keisha Chandler, and did I miss someone? Wait, no, I got everybody? Okay, yes, cool. In this session today presenting, I will also be dropping a survey for you at the end of the session, along with the link that will take you back to the main room. Your voices cannot be heard today as participants. However, please feel free to use the chat, and the session will be moderated by Dr. Cruse, and she will have questions that they'll be talking about. If there is something that is pressing, I'll be sure to make sure that they get it. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Cruse so that she can get us started.
Thank you so much, Monica. Welcome, everyone. We are so excited to be here. This is a different space for us in DTech Tag, and we are just grateful that we were invited to bring our voice to this discussion. A little bit about who we are. We are a program of the Delta Research and Educational Foundation, which is also in partnership with Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. And we do work across the country in professional development as well as education advocacy. So we're going to be bringing you a conversation today talking about addressing preschool practices that harm African-American children from a couple different lenses. How are we connected to CAAASA? I think it's important that we share this story because in education, we know that relationships matter, right? Education is a heart matter. That's what we stand on in DTech. And because we were connected to CAAASA through the CBC conference a couple years ago, when we led a conversation on literacy, we were invited to their conference in March that we didn't get to go to because of COVID, but we were also invited to the table. Because of a presentation, we were able to get to the table where CAAASA was leading conversations nationally with leaders. And so here we are today because of that connection and that relationship. So we're grateful, and we're grateful that you're joining us. So now I want us to really think as we set this framework for this discussion. I want you to ponder a couple what ifs, okay? A couple what ifs. And I know people are serving in many different ways, and we're going to find out where you're coming from here in a second, but I need you to just follow with me. I'm going somewhere here. Ain't that what they say from the pulpit? I'm going somewhere here. The pipeline that matters. What if the academic pipeline was just as important as the discipline pipeline? What if? What if? What if the vertical alignment was just as important and set up to be intentional and strategic as social promotion? What if? What if funding was truly equitable? What if? And what if there was a focus on literacy rates as much as there was on graduation rates? That one came to me in the middle of the night, and I tell you, it sat on me, and I knew it was for this moment, for such a time as this, as we start this discussion. Because in that pondering that what if, you got to really think about social promotion versus a high quality education for all students. Those are the things we must ponder as we look at the pipeline that matters from the perspective and lens in which we serve and where we have control and where we have influence. So the first step before we get into this content and this discussion, I want us to think about what if us. Let's always start with ourselves. Let's look at where we sit as we have and can do whatever we can in this education system to make it more equitable and highly equitable in a high quality education for all. So without that, we're going to move to the agenda, and we're going to talk about everything that we're going to look at today. We're going to look at who we are, big ideas, how well do you know your state, why we are here, how do we fix it, and next steps. All right.
Thank you, Dr. Craig. So who are we? My name is Keisha Chandler. I am an educator with over 25 years of experience. I'm currently the implementation manager at ASCD's Professional Learning Services, and I'm also an adjunct professor at the College of Education at Trinity Washington University, teaching teachers, and that's what I love to do. As you can see, you'll have the presentation linked to you all and all of our Twitter handles. You can connect with us, at us, talk to us through Twitter, talk to us through the chat. We really want this to be as engaging as possible.
Absolutely. Good morning, good morning, good morning. I bring you greetings from Atlanta, Georgia. I am Char-Shenda Covington, the proud principal of Stone Mountain Elementary School in the DeKalb County School District. I am also the Chief Academic Officer and owner of Academic Literacy Services, as well as I Learn at the Kitchen Table. And I'm a recent author, so I'm super excited about that, as well as super excited to share with you this morning.
All right, and I am Dr. Johni Cruse Craig. I just was able to introduce what we're doing today, but I serve as that National Project Director for DTEC TAG, those two programs. I'm an education advocate from the heart. I'm an author, life business coach, and entrepreneur. And please connect at One Positive Spirit on Twitter. If you have that link there, all of our Twitter handles are live, so you can click them to get to us and conversate with us.
So our big ideas, the harmful practice that impacts African-American preschool scholars. And so what we want to make sure that we leave here with the understanding of is how is the focus on behavior impacting, how the focus on behavior and not academics impact what happens with our children, how the funding sources need to possibly be refined to ensure that equity happens in preschool classrooms. And lastly, curriculum choice and professional learning. These are the big ideas that provide a target focus on some of the current harmful practices of pre-K students and their education.
So thank you for that, Char-Shenda. Before we jump into these big ideas, I see a lot of comments in the chat room, and I'm loving all these introductions, but I want to give us a vision, and I want you all to go to menti.com, www.menti.com, and we'll place it in the chat as well. And once you get to menti.com, as soon as Char-Shenda shares the code with us, we are going to enter in code 79.
I am sharing.
Thank you.
It's a delay, you
yes.
know, all the way in Georgia.
You're gonna enter in the code 7941320, and I'll type that into the chat. 79.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Monica.
And I'm working on pulling it up. For some reason, that screen is not being shared right now, but it will come shortly.
Once you go there, just click on the choice. And I believe the choices are state level, school leader, teacher, and then education supporter. So who are you this morning? Some of us have served multiple roles, and we would like to know who you are today.
Can you guys see the screen?
Yes, awesome.
Perfect. And as Keisha was sharing, we do know that some of you serve in multiple capacities, but we want to know, who are you listening as today?
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Not one of your multiple personalities, like I said.
So this is awesome. And this is also a tool that you could absolutely use at the beginning of a faculty or a district meeting, just to start the conversation on whatever topic. It's free. One thing about educators is we love to look for free resources. And so this is one that you guys can use to share with your staff or just to gather information quickly, and it provides a visual. So about 10 more seconds. And so colleagues, this looks like an amazing, almost even split. And so that's helpful to us, because we want to make sure that everybody leaves with something to spark their next steps from the lens or the seat that they currently sit in.
Oh, wow.
This is amazing. You guys don't know how exciting this is for us to see. And so what I am going to do is I'm going to stop on this screen, but don't leave Menti, because I'm going to share another screen with you that we will need you guys to also engage in regarding the state of California. So I am nervous to click stop sharing, so I'm not. So I'm just gonna hit the back button and I'm gonna go to the next slide and then I'm gonna make this large. Oh, some of you have already started. Perfect. And so from this screen, what we are asking you guys to do, and all of the reports that we use to pull our data, again, it is linked into the actual presentation, but we want you guys to rate your state based on the number or the percentage of having high quality teachers and leaders in classrooms and school districts. How are you guys, or how well are you guys addressing the special population, specifically special education and English learners? The educational background of your staff. And that could be at the district level, school level, the same. The student teacher ratio, political will, the amount of instruction that pre-K scholars are receiving, and professional development, and last but certainly not least, the effective curriculum. And that is the data integration and vertical alignment all the same. And so the 3 ratings are not met, partially met, or fully met. And we just want to see how you guys are ranking your state. And so I will set a timer because I am poly time on task. So I'm going to give you guys 2 minutes, and we will differentiate instruction if needed, but we're going to start with 2 minutes. So this is my 15th year in education. So of course, back in the day, I didn't have a timer and we would just sit there all day. But now we're going to use 2 minutes. And I'll give you a 30-second warning. And just so you guys know, if you look at the bottom right side of the screen, that lets you know how many people have responded. So right now we know that there are 55 participants present, but only 21 have responded. So we'll wait.
There's a lot of partially met.
So that level 3 is the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And so we only have 1 that has exceeded 3. And we're going to talk about it. So it's not a good or a bad thing because we still have to figure out how we were actually rated from the educational researchers. But this is good to see how well you guys fare up to what was actually found. So we're up to 23 participants. And actually, Ms. Gonzalez, that would be great, even if you're not in the field. Where do you think your state stands? It's okay to not be an educator yet. You may be a supporter. You want children to know how to read because guess what? The children around us will be our doctors and our lawyers very soon. So absolutely, you have a voice and a seat at the table. So just give us what you think.
Yeah.
We'll take it, Ms. Gonzalez.
Thank you, Char-Shenda, for encouraging her to do that. I think it's important because as we think about what we're talking about here in the harmful practices, one of those harmful practices is not knowing.
Right.
You know, not even knowing where your state lies. Like, how is it, how is this, how do the assessments look? How does this show up in your state? That's a harmful practice, and that's not just on a district, that's on us. Because if we live somewhere, we should want to know how these things are measuring up. So I would implore you to go do some researching to sort of find out where it is if you don't know.
And so Dr. Craig got you guys an extra minute. And so you guys can continue to include your responses. And if you see as I hover over how it makes it large and makes that visual that much more clear. And so while your 29 seconds are running, I am going to just hover over so that you can see the difference. Just so that you guys see, and like I said, this is a free resource, and I am going to stop sharing this screen so that we can go back to the presentation, and we're going to actually talk about the findings. So we appreciate you guys for sharing your voice, and again, this link will still remain live even though I am going to stop sharing the presentation. But I want to go back to the presentation that we're going to present from because we are going to go over this information with you.
And the data we are going to review will be for the state of California, since that is the majority of our audience, but the report that is linked covers every single state, so don't feel like you're left out.
Yes, absolutely. So let's look at California at a glance. We just took a moment. We took some time, which was important for you to really reflect on what you thought where you thought your state was. So we just want to talk about where California fell in regards to this particular report by the National Institute for Early Education Research. Again, Keisha told you that it is linked through the link that Monica is sharing. If you open the presentation, you can click on California at a glance and it'll take you directly to that report. So not met, this is for California. We're looking at California. Not met was educational background, class size, hours and dosage of instruction, and high quality teaching is not determined. Now I just need to take a pause on that one myself. What? Okay. Next, partially met. Political will, partially met. Political will, strong leaders, effective curriculum, dual English language learners, data-driven and integrated systems. That's partially met. And fully met, which is great, amazing. We would love to see fully met anything when we're talking about our children. They have 2 adults, look at EO standards they meet, special education, professional development, and child assessments. Those are all fully met.
And before we move forward, I just want one of the things that are not met, specifically for California, around the hours and dosage, most of the programs are still half day. So by the time those babies get into kindergarten, they are not used to that rigorous schedule of being all day. And the high quality teaching not being determined is because the evaluation system oftentimes is not connected to what happens in K-12.
And Keisha, that's exactly where I was headed. Because,
sorry.
Well, no, and I think that speaks to where we all are based on where we sit, right? Because what I think is interesting is we partially met the expectation for strong leaders. So we have the right people at the top, but there's a disconnect between the top-down approach. Correct. So you can be, and I shared with my staff yesterday in a meeting, performance is reflective of leadership. So it does not matter how great you are at the top if the collective efficacy does not reflect the expectations of the organization. So this is one of those things I want us to ponder on as leaders, as supporters of education, as teachers. Your voices matter as well. There's a disconnect, and keep in mind, it didn't say fully met, it said partially met. So we have most of the right leaders in the place.
That's good.
So we're those people, we're all about the crucial conversations and the courageous conversations. So looking at the harmful practices, and again, we are resting our hat on these 3 big ideas. I will focus heavily on the first one. There is an extreme focus on behavior opposed to academics. However, the focus of schools are to educate. It is to ensure that students are able to master or demonstrate proficiency on the standards. But again, is heavy on behavior. And not only is the focus heavy on behavior, we don't have the processes in place to address the undesirable behaviors. So there's limited access to social emotional learning. So we can identify some of the issues of children, but how are we addressing them? And it can't be left up to them to fix it. And the other part, the increased suspension rate. We all know that there's disproportionality across the board regarding the rate at which Black and Brown scholars are suspended. And that happens even in pre-K. It's one thing when you're talking about it in high school. It looks a little different when you're talking about it in middle school. But how many of us have literally thought about the rate at which preschool children that may not, this may be their first time in school, this may be their first time interacting with other children in a social setting, in a structured environment. And this may very well be their first structured environment, but they're being suspended at a higher rate, in most cases, double or more.
Yep. And the next one is funding. The harmful practices. Remember, we're talking about harmful practices. So a harmful practice in regards to funding is focusing more on money and politics than student learning. And that's heavy. That bureaucracy is so heavy in education. And they were talking about it in one of the keynotes this morning as they were opening up about, you know, the politics and how people say, I don't want to be a part. Education is nothing but politics right now. And it is a harmful practice because when you look at our babies from the beginning, and let's even go before pre-K, you know, when we were preparing for this discussion, we talked about this, and we're talking about harmful practices for pre-K students, but what about the harmful practices from the womb? What about those? because they play a part for how our children are developed and where they are when they enter preschool, right? So we even have to talk about that from that lens. But the politics and the money instead of student learning is definitely a harmful practice. Low salaries. Low salaries. Teachers, administrators, leaders, anyone in education should be paid where they don't have to worry about if they can even afford to get a place to stay that's income based.
Correct.
That's important. That's a harmful practice. It does not only harm the children, it harms the educators that are trying to serve those children. It harms the families that's trying to raise those children. It's a big problem, big problem. That's why we have to make sure we get our census done. Hello? We have to make sure we get our census done so we can get our communities the funds they deserve. Overcrowded classrooms. I was in the classroom for 17 years, and let me tell you, those numbers ticked up every year. That's a harmful practice. We know that you cannot be as effective with high student to teacher ratios in a classroom as if the number was low. It's a harmful practice. Our babies need a bit more one-on-one. They need small group. They need a differentiated instruction in different ways, because you have to first learn them, see how they learn, and then be able to present them in ways where they can be successful and become confident in their learning. If we have overcrowded classrooms, we don't have that. That's a harmful practice. The next one is culturally appropriate workforce. Well, you know, the numbers speak for themselves. Don't have to go too far into that, but in knowing that, it is still our duty and our responsibility to continue to equip those that are in front of our children to be more culturally relevant in teaching and learning, and to have a culturally responsive classroom. So those are some of the harmful practices in the funding, and Keisha's going to talk to us about that next big bucket there.
Yeah, so the curriculum choice professional learning. And so ill-equipped, I don't necessarily like that term, but not fully prepared educators in the space. So I believe one of the statistics you'll see on that report is around a bachelor's degree versus a certificate, a 2-year associate certificate. And we know that some of our programs, our university programs, do not fully prepare teachers for that experience, right? So we have to have more experience-based education, especially around preschool. There are a lot of decisions happening around pre-K or preschool that don't always involve the school leaders. And we found this out when Char-Shenda shared that her building inherited a whole preschool curriculum, and she didn't know until she saw the box coming in her building. So that was a district decision that was made and was not even told to the building leader. So how can Char-Shenda fully support her teachers without even being prepared herself to know that this was coming into her building? In some states, in some districts, there is limited professional development for those educators. The last school I worked in, our pre-K teachers were rarely in professional development with us, with the whole building. They would go to their own in the district, and that disconnect, right? So it didn't even feel sometimes as if they were a part of our staff, unfortunately. So and that leads to working in those silos. So what happened is I started to see, well, my kindergarten teachers need to interact with my preschool students so they can know who's coming in. They can start giving some of those earlier assessments and talk about the academics instead of passing that behavior file along. So that's what happened more often, that the behavior file would go more towards follow that student more than the academic piece. And then the lack of cultural relevance in the curriculum. And so when I speak of in the curriculum, I'm speaking mostly literature, right? So many schools will do equity audits. Many schools will take a look at their books and their literature and their curriculum. However, they don't always dig down into preschool. And we're going to talk about that whole literacy piece, but before children reach the age of 5, they need to be exposed to 2,500 hours of reading to be at grade level, to be ready to read, 2,500 hours. We need to be careful of the type of books that they are reading, because we know from the history of children's literature from over 1,000 years ago, going all the way back to Aesop, books were written to address the society. And we know that Black and brown people were always portrayed as less than, as animals even. They would be pictures of people with smaller brains. So we need to make sure that we go through and really comb through the Dr. Seuss before he got right, the Dr. Seuss books that we even have on our shelf. Okay, so we'll talk about that part later. I don't want to go too deep because upsets me sometimes. But then effective cultural diversity within that audit that is performed.
And I think listening to my colleagues, this is the new version of the equity versus equality debate. Like, we have to call it what it is, right? And just thinking about behavior in academics, going back to that lens, one of the things we have to keep at the forefront, I always tell my teachers, you can't grade a student on a skill that you have not explicitly taught. So how are we able to expel children or suspend children for skills we haven't taught them, or for behaviors that we haven't taught them how to channel? So it's the exact same thing. And so that's why we need to shift away from behavior and more so academics and teaching them the how. And so I think that's where we're headed with our next few slides. I'm sorry, Keisha. I'm trying.
No. I mean, you're right there. So here's what matters, right? We talked about the pipeline that matters, but within that pipeline, let's look at literacy, curriculum, and quality staff. If we can now shift the focus to solutions oriented, let's what can we do? How do we fix this? And put these three things in the forefront.
Absolutely. And just so you guys know, I don't know if you're able to watch the chat, but Deanna Hall shared that in California, 70% of teachers with children 0 to 5 are people of color versus 26% in the K-12 setting.
And we're going to look at another statistic that supports just that. So you took me right there. So thank you so much, Ms. Hall. This data is coming from an organization that I use regularly, and it's called 0 to 3, where they had released a State of Babies report every year, and you can find your own state information. But what amazed me about California is that last bullet, that 74.1% of the babies being born are of color. 74.1%. Nationwide, the number is like 51-point-some%. That means we're no longer the minority. We can no longer say, well, the minority children, that is our audience. So people who get upset about Black Lives Matter, Brown Lives, whatever matters, it matters because this is now what our nation looks like. Of those children, 38.7% live in households with incomes less than 25% in the state of $25,000 for a family of 4 in the state of California. So not only do we have to look at race, we have to consider socioeconomics. And then what amazed me is there are 1.4 million babies that represent 3.7% of the state's population. That's a lot of children coming into the K-12 space, which is why we can no longer separate what's happening in early childhood away from K-12. We really have to start looking at P to 20.
I am going to unmute myself so you can hear me. And I won't read these statistics to you, but we wanted to make sure that you can see the indicators that lead to positive early learning. Because again, when you're talking about the funding, when you're talking about the curriculum, when you're talking about those, all of that goes back to this. Parents read to babies every day. That exposure, that matters. I think Keisha said 25,000. That's a lot, 2,500. But that's a lot if there's 0. So if a child is coming in with that type of deficit from the beginning, and someone in the chat already mentioned it's not the school to prison pipeline, we're just gonna take it to pre-K because it starts before. Because we talked about how some of these things start when they're in the womb. And so you're looking at the developmental screenings received or the lack thereof. Of course, if we are in a family of 4 with $25,000 as our max income, it's probably safe to say we don't have access to high quality health insurance. I mean, I'm just using, these are the statistics that we found, based on reports. So if we're putting all of those puzzle pieces together, it highlights another concern. We haven't even mentioned the special ed part of it. Because there are students, we all know, my philosophy on special ed is that children learn differently. We all learn differently. Translation, we're all special ed. However, for those students that need more support, if we're not properly diagnosed, we're probably also not properly served. So in addition to me missing those 2,500 hours of reading instruction, before going to pre-K. Now I learn differently. The cost of care as percent of income in single parent households. You know, is it like, even with now, a lot of people thought that the whole equity debate would go away because now every kid has a device. That has nothing to do with what they do with the device. So I won't go
to access quality internet to get onto the device.
The internet connectivity is the next issue, right? So now that we have a computer, it powers on if we have power in the household. But guess what? It's one thing, it's safe to say if we don't have power, we also don't have internet access. And so now that your teacher is providing this high quality instruction online, you still don't have access. You have the tools, but you still don't have access. So what are your immediate thoughts? This is where we want you guys to take off in the chat. And when I say take off, we mean take off. Everybody's looking at the bottom of the screen, because what are your immediate thoughts when you're thinking about governmental funding?
And Rhonda already, woo.
Rhonda is ready. We love Rhonda Miles Brown. So think about the zero tolerance policy. Think about how that, we know how it impacted the prison system. Have we ever thought about it when we talk about the school system? Now, we're not going to make this a political decision, but we have, discussion, but we have to keep it at the forefront. And then, of course, last but not least, the institutional racism. How does that show up? We know about the suspension rates being disproportionate. We know about that, right? So what are your immediate thoughts? And you can speak to each of these three, or you can speak to one or the other, whichever one resonates most with you. We just want to hear your thoughts. And as I'm looking at the screen, we're going to try to respond as well as read some of them out, but you guys are definitely engaged and we appreciate it. So I'm going to have to hover over one of the screens because it's going kind of fast.
It is.
Oh, wow, this is really fast. Okay. How are quality rating and improvement systems impacting high quality in early care and education? Great question. I teach preschool in the city of Camden, and devices are not provided for them, and they are expected to be online approximately an hour a day. They do not have internet to even be online. And so that speaks again, is an hour a day enough for anything? Because think of it this way, are we able to take care of our households with only working an hour a day? So I'm just literally reading the comments, but that's something, an hour a day. And keep in mind, we've been out from the traditional setting since March, right? So you're going to come back 6 months later with an hour a day. Perfect.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you. Thank you for that. Educate yourselves. The information is out there. Thank you.
And I think I'm trying to get back to Ophelia's comment. I absolutely love the way she phrased it. I am going to try to get back to it.
Yes, Deanna.
She said funding should be equitable to all from cradle to career. Why does it need to be different? Absolutely. Now that's something, if you could add me on that, Ophelia, and Dr. Char Covington on Twitter, I need to keep that at the forefront of my thinking.
Yeah, grace and empathy.
That was very powerful, Char-Shenda. That whole, I'm a word person, and that jumped out at me as well. And
absolutely.
It's the truth. It's the truth. Absolute truth. And it's a harmful practice not to do so.
And Renee Bender, regarding that zero tolerance, says zero tolerance is an excuse for school leaders to not think. You can add me at that one too, Renee, at Dr. Char Covington.
A whole sermon in this chat box. Yes.
It is a sermon. Zero tolerance is not equitable because it does not take into consideration the differences between each individual child and family we have to work with. Institutional racism prevents some teachers from being able to fully and effectively work with our children. Absolutely.
Thank you, Monica, for saving this. I need it.
Yes.
Yeah, I need all of this.
Did I get that right, Keisha?
You did. I just put it in there too. As you were
Please add us.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, Amanda. So we're trying to move on, you guys, but you guys are feeding us heavily in the chat. So we appreciate you guys and keep them coming. So now we are at how do we fix it? What's in your locus of control? What can we do based on whatever seat you are currently in? What is it that you can do?
Absolutely. So Char-Shenda, I'm going to ask if you take belief 1, please, because I'm going to jump on belief 2. Thank you.
So when we're talking about discipline, I know for those of us that have seen, I can't think of her name, it may be Rita that did the TED Talk about Know Your Why. It doesn't change when you're talking about why students act out. Focus more so on why they are acting out and not the what. Because if you focus on the why, you can help maneuver that. Because maybe you can teach a skill. Maybe they're upset because they didn't eat and they missed snack time. We don't know why they act out, but we have to ask the question. We can't always react without responding to the initial issue. And so that's where we have the disproportionality in the discipline rates, because we need to focus heavily on social emotional learning. SEL is not just a buzzword. I know everybody adds it to their signature and their emails nowadays, but we need to actually embrace what social emotional learning means. Not only SEL for the children, but also the educators. One of the things I do, this is different for everybody. My teachers can tolerate a little more based on how they are being fed by their leadership team. I don't take it lightly. I text my staff every day, some type of help, self-care tip. You got this, smile, breathe, 5 ways to de-stress, definitions of eustress, whatever it is, because I need the name of my school is Stone Mountain Elementary. I need for my teachers to continue to move the mountain even from a virtual space. So guess what? Now I have to wake up a little earlier to send 65 text messages each morning. But guess what? My staff, they are better prepared or better willing to serve students with challenges, because I need my staff to stay grounded as we're having the different parents run across the screen. Because see, that doesn't happen when you're in a brick and mortar setting. They may try to come in, but we're in their homes at this point. So we have to focus more on the why and not the what, and then identify what skills our students need, because they come from different backgrounds. And we also have to make sure that culture plays a role, because in some cultures, it's disrespectful to look a person in their eyes, where in other cultures, it's very disrespectful to not look them in the eyes. So we have to keep how culture changes the name of the game. And again, that goes into equity versus equality. We can't level the playing field by giving everybody the same thing.
Thank you for that. It's something that just struck me when you talked about culture. We need to get to know our families more as well to even get to that point, right? So when we educate that child, we're also educating that entire family, because if you are a parent, your child comes home and tells you everything. So you hope. And if they don't tell you everything, please believe they're coming back to tell their teacher everything that happens at home. Okay, so I believe 2 and believe 3, I'm going to speak to in tandem. When you understand how children learn how to read, you can better understand their reading struggles. Dyslexia is hard to pick up on, and something that is not diagnosed in school. That's often diagnosed by a doctor, a psychologist, psychiatrist, and all of that. But if you understand that students learn how to read through mimicking and through watching and knowing that we read from left to right, which is actually changing because of technology devices. So where all of us learn how to read in the Z formation, you know, starting at the top, going into Z from left to right and down, children are now learning how to read in the F formation, meaning that they read down the menu side on the left-hand side and across the top to select the information that they need in the middle. So it's going to be very interesting in the next few years to see that shift on how children are actually learning how to read. But they still need that to know that text goes from left to right. They still need to know a cover of a book in the back of a book. They still need to know the spine. They still need to know a letter versus a word. They need to know that the letter A can serve as the word A as well. All of these things happen in preschool. And so until we really, as educators, learn the science of how to read, because these same skills that I teach my teachers that are teaching elementary, I'm getting more and more pre-K students taking my course, pre-K teachers taking my course because they want to start the foundation off for the building. And I just think teaching reading should be in everyone's caseload at the university level. Not because I want to have a job forever, but because it's that important.
Yeah, and Keisha, I want to speak to a comment in the chat to transition us and actually take us back, because Deanna said the bridge between 0 to 5 education and K-12 education needs to be strengthened so that elementary teachers will have that transitional piece they need. We talked about that a little bit, but I want to highlight it. I want to amplify it because it's important. And when we were talking about this, that was a glaring thing to us because so many silos are happening. You have everything disconnected and, it's preschool, kindergarten, elementary, middle, high, college. We need a pipeline there. We need vertical alignment there. And I believe us, where we sit, wherever you serve, how do you bring that discussion to your table? How do you bring that to amplify it so that we can get policies and legislation and practices and best practices in place to close those silos and make them more of a fluid transition? Because that's what our children need. The more we see it as silo, but just think about them living it. They go somewhere, then they go another place, there's a total disconnect. They do something there, they go to another place, total disconnect. We have to start having those discussions as to how we better do vertical alignment to make it equitable from the bottom to the top.
And so when we're looking at the, again, you as educators are always focused heavily on everybody else, but right now we want you guys to be selfish, right? Think about you, who you are, where you currently sit, how you plan to work in the future. For our future educator that's in the chat, what are your personal next steps? And so these are just 3 questions that we use to frame your thinking. And so looking at, go ahead, Dr. Craig.
No, I was going to look at question 1. What questions do you have for your district or policymakers? That's a very important question because I can tell you when I started in education, even going through to become an educator in my educational journey in college, you take the policy class, you take the law classes and, you learn that stuff, but I really didn't go into teaching with this mindset. I didn't have this lens of, policymakers in district from that level. I was straight focused on what I was doing as a teacher in my classroom. It wasn't until I matriculated and grew that I realized that, it doesn't matter how hard I'm working down here until some of this stuff up here begins to shift and change and be, tore down. We're going to continue in some of these same cyclic behaviors and cyclic things that we see. So what are your personal next steps in regards to understanding the legality and leaderships, understanding the advocacy work that you can do at wherever you sit? Go ahead.
I would add to that, with this current federal administration, the last report that came out around preschool suspension rates from the federal government was not released since 2016. And I'm just going to leave that there. I can't talk too heavily about politics today because I want to enjoy the rest of my weekend. But what I will say is that that report has not been released since 2016. There's some data that's not even being tracked federally. And so it's a big question mark, what is occurring and what is being supported or not being supported by the federal government. So we don't know if the policies work. We don't even know if the policies are in place. We do know that the Civil Rights Division was removed from Special Ed Department of Education. So I'll just leave that there. I have a lot of questions for the federal government.
And in the chat, they're talking about things that we actually can leave here today thinking about as far as policy and being an advocate in your district. They're talking about universal pre-K for all,
Yes.
How some families don't qualify for it because of their income. That's not equitable. That should not matter. It should be universal. So those are things that you can take to a table. Those are things that you can have people to start researching and to bring tidbits to different meetings, be it parent, PTA meetings, whatever. Start bringing forth awareness. Awareness and education so that more people understand, because when you get more people going in the same direction, speaking the same language, advocating for the same thing, you start getting something done.
And the last question regarding parents, the questions you have for parents and students, sometimes we forget to include the students in the discussion. And that's critical. They know what they need. They may not know how to articulate it, but they do know that they didn't understand the story that Miss Washington read. And so the other part, I want to challenge you guys, because this is an area of improvement for my school. I am a principal of a turnaround school, and I absolutely love my job. I wouldn't have it any other way. But what I do realize is that there is an absence of parents, or the percentages don't align with the needs of my building. And so think of it that way. How do you foster relationships that you can leverage so that they can tell you what they need? No parent wants their child to be unsuccessful, whether they value education or not. Everybody wants the reason to be proud of their child. And so if you think of it from that lens, how do you foster a relationship that will have them to open up to you, to specify what they need, to communicate what they need? Because think about why children don't volunteer when you ask a question in class. Nobody wants to volunteer and be wrong. So why do you think you're not hearing from the parents? So what does that look like? How does that change the scope of the dialogue? So we have to think outside of the box. How do we welcome them into a space where maybe they're not comfortable, but they understand that we're here to serve them as well? And that goes back to what Dr. Craig and Keisha was saying regarding supporting the whole family. Because now the kids are at home with them. So if we just serve the children well, we're still dropping the ball because they're being impacted by everything in the household. We can control the classroom when they're with us, but not when it's at home in their bedroom.
And I mean, let's look at a historical lens. The school has always been part of the cornerstone of the community. And somewhere along the line, that has been kind of lost, right? So when you look at childhood trauma or adverse childhood experiences, we have to connect it to those adverse community experiences because they work in tandem. Where I experience, where I live, that impacts what I go through. And I think COVID exposed this more than anything when certain communities were being hurt, physically. We started to see where then now, what does this look like mentally for everyone?
Okie dokie. So of course, we're all educators, I think from 15 to 20 plus years on the call. So what we need, you have to have a ticket out the door. We started with giving you guys our objectives. And so my other screen, Keisha, are you all able to see the ticket out the door screen?
No.
Okay. Okay.
No, but I don't want to, we have 7 minutes left. I don't want to shortchange anyone. So let's do this. Let's go to the questions because I saw some great comments and questions. And Carolina, I would need to scroll all the way back up, but she's an elementary school educator and she wants to support her TK teachers more. And for those of you that don't know what TK stands for in the state of California, they have transitional kindergarten teachers. So what can she do to support them more? As an instructional coach, what I would do was often bring my preschool teachers into the conversation with my K-1 teachers, so that those conversations can be held to see, all right, this is what was missing. These skills are missing in this literacy group here. What can the preschool teacher do to support that? So I did want to go to that question and bring that up. Char-Shenda, do you see any other questions in the box we want to talk about?
Usually
we go overtime, and I'm excited that we have the time to engage people in chat.
Yes, so I don't want to make my screen smaller, but my other device just went down, so I'm unable to see anything.
Oh.
That's why I was asking what you guys could see.
Okay. All right, so hold on. Let me go back to the chat for you, and Dr. Craig, you can help me.
As you go to the chat, I actually wanted to just bring what I've seen in the chat and throughout this conversation as we're closing. The thought that I'm leaving with and what I have brewing in me is that we have to raise this narrative. We have to lead this discussion and amplify the early childhood discussion. Because until we firm up the early part, we're gonna keep circling and spinning our wheels at the other parts, those later grades. Why can't we advocate for the funding, for the resources, for the capacity, for the people, for the training to firm up these early childhood and have it universal? Because if we give them a firm foundation, if we give them a firm foundation and can follow them for a good set of years firmly, once they really learn to read, because that's part of the issue once they get up in those higher grades because they've been socially promoted. But once they learn to read and that literacy piece is strong within them, they can teach themselves anything. So, you know, sometimes I sit back and wonder, you know, was this on purpose, right? Is this system,
Well,
you know, this is just me rhetorically thinking out loud. Is this on purpose? However, I think we all can sort of come to a conclusion there, but in the same breath, we need to be accountable for taking this conversation to the tables, whatever table you sit at, it doesn't matter. Take it to the table.
absolutely.
Take it with statistics, take it with some educational points, some topics, and with some solutions of what could be next. How do we begin to shift this thing and change this thing? And so this is a thing for each one of us. This is an individual yet collective piece of advocacy that we must do. Because if we don't, we're going to end up keep getting the same thing that we've always gotten.
And that definition is called insanity,
And that's
right?
one of the things we have to make sure, once we are clear on what the issue is, like you have to be bold. There is no way we can redirect any funding, advocate for better curriculum, advocate for higher pay timidly. So we have to be very, very clear and bold on what the issues are, because harmful practices that impact pre-K, impact kindergarten, impact first grade. It doesn't get better with time. It's not wine at all.
And we do know
We
that
have to be bold in addressing those issues.
yes, and we do know that the economy uses the reading scores of our third and fourth graders to determine the financial stability of the future. And we also know that those same reading scores are used to develop prisons.
And one thing I just saw in the chat, I'm trying to go to it, Cheryl Chavis said, childcare, you know, they have to start changing this whole narrative, this myth about
Yes.
being early education being childcare. I think that's a whole movement that somebody can take a little phrase and start putting that out there, getting people on board to take that message out to the masses. I think we can start there. I think that's a place to start in bringing education and awareness in this state.
Thank you, Cheryl. I know Cheryl from Camden, y'all, and Leslie. I'm just gonna be a little.
Well, I think we're at the close, team, and I think this has been an amazing discussion. Please connect with each of us on our Twitter handles. Connect with DTech Change Agent. You'll see that there, and then I believe that next slide there's linked to the organizations in which we are connected to for these particular work, which is the Delta Teacher Efficacy Campaign, and the Delta Research Educational Foundation, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. All of the links to the organizations are in the presentation that you're receiving from Monica. We want to say thank you,
Thank you.
Monica, for being such a wonderful facilitator. We appreciate you, and thanks to all the attendees for coming in here for this really important discussion. I think this discussion has ignited some things in many of us and shifted us to even think and look at things from a different lens, as it all begins in the beginning, in the womb. We got to find a way to advocate there. So I'll turn it over to my teammates to close us on out here.
So as we were looking at quotes to close out with, Julian Bond rang true to me. So violence is Black children going to school for 12 years. And if we look at this, let's start at 3, right? So for 14 years and receiving 6 years worth of education. Let's change that narrative.
What happened?
And for me, it has been an absolute pleasure to share with you guys today, along with my colleagues. And thanks, Monica and the whole CAAASA team. We are super grateful to share with you in this space. For me, just be bold. One of the things I always tell people, thinking back to Senator John Lewis, I get in good trouble for fun, okay? I am going to advocate for my teachers. I am going to advocate for my children. And unfortunately, if I get in trouble, it was for a good cause. And so I think we have to let that resonate with us. Everybody has a voice from whatever lens they are, whether you're a parent of a preschool child, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a superintendent, whether you're the state deputy, whatever title you have. I just want to make sure that you guys are clear that you have a voice, your voice matters, and we need you. Our tomorrow depends heavily on everybody that can hear our voices right now. So we appreciate you for sharing with us. We are grateful to be in your presence. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And you guys have a great weekend.
Thank you so much, everybody. I wanted to say, just to answer a couple of the questions in the chat. Well, first of all, let me say, I am so happy that I was assigned to support this session. I'm a secondary educator, but this is the foundation. This is where it starts. And I learned so much. And I agree with what someone said, that it wasn't long enough. I could listen to you ladies talk and teach me so much more for the rest of this day. So thank you all for such an amazing presentation. The main question is, can they see this later? And I just put in the chat for you all the link to the CAAASA YouTube page, so you can access the content there. You can also go to extendedsession.com that I also put in the chat, and you will be able to access the sessions there. So if there was another session that you really wanted to see in addition to this one, you can go to extended session and see the session that you didn't have a chance to attend today. I will leave the room open, and I'm going to copy this chat, and I will also put in again for you the survey link. Please leave your thoughts. I know you gave so much love in the chat, but if you could put some of that love on the survey, that would be amazing. I'll put the survey back in there, as well as the link to the main page. I know you all have it in your email, but if I can make it easier for you, like, that's why I'm here. So I'm about to put that in there. Thank you all so very much, presenters, and thank you all for attending. So the room will stay open. I will drop all the links once again. If you are just joining, somebody said they just hopped in, yes, the presentation, I will link it again as well in the chat. So again, thank you, and enjoy the rest of today's CAAASA presentation. Woo-hoo!
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
And so I was looking at the tickets out the door, you guys. Some people were saying they were going to share with their colleagues. One teacher said that she's actually going to allow her students to ask, and she's going to ask them more questions and allow them to respond. And so the suggestion was to ask them the questions based on their classmates' responses so that they can build the communication piece. And she's kind of sort of out of it. So that's super exciting. Thank you,
Student
ladies.
choice and student agency.
We've never finished on time.
Never.